actual state of the Kenyan economy, the advocacy paper. And now we know that there's the finance bill and the budget estimates which are being tabled in Parliament. And so we think that this will be the litmus test of what the government is actually intending to do to deal with the problems which we have identified. So the question we're asking is, in a situation of economic crisis, do we see a disciplined government which is prepared to share the pain and cut wasteful, extravagant expenditures in the interest of service delivery to the vulnerable and the general public? Or do we see a government which is bent on maintaining the privileges and perks of the political and bureaucratic elite who are not contributing productively to economic activity? And the litmus test, of course, of whether the government is actually focusing on solving these problems is the estimates contain and the financial bill 25-26. So this report is quite long, so we're not going to be able to go into it in detail, and it will be handed out to you at the end of the event. But it's in two parts. The first part is the memorandum delivered by the campaign to the Board of Directors of the IMF in April, and the second half is a postscript to the memorandum which updates the situation by conducting a preliminary analysis of the budget estimates and the finance bill for financial year 2025-2026. So as I've stated, the budget is the litmus test of the government of Kenya's intentions. But of course, the suspension of the IMF program is of concern because we feel that one of the motivating factors was the fact that like jobless growth. There is growth, but it's not generating jobs. Youth unemployment, poorly delivered services, and rampant corruption, which is obviously the main trigger of the deep anger which motivated the protests, and is something that Kenyans in general have said they reject over the years. So without adopting this people-centered lens and addressing the real issues affecting the people, fiscal consolidation or revenue mobilizing efforts will be rejected by Kenyans who increasingly have low trust in this government and in the International Monetary Fund. As I said, the focus is the government. We're not claiming that the general public puts the IMF at the top of the list of people responsible for this, but in general, I would say there is a low level of faith. So some of the observations that we make in the report are that political survival, not fiscal discipline, will determine policy to 2028. We believe the reason for the suspension of the program with the IMF is that the government is focusing on political survival, buying up support, and therefore does not want to be constrained by conditionalities and the sort of policies which it should be adopting given the dimensions of the crisis, and it also wants to demonstrate
and the sort of policies which
some
it
level
should be adopted.
of quote-unquote development. So projects are being revived, and debts are being taken, and Mwalimu will go into this, talking about refinancing corruption, really. Projects which were started, which were abandoned, and then now are being refinanced so that the political class can demonstrate to the people some level of performance. And we all saw the president opening some housing units, and the comments in social media were not particularly flattering. People pointed out that these were projects which were undertaken by the previous government, and basically some people are very witty and quite cutting on social media. So some said, well, all he did was, slap a new coat of paint on those buildings before opening them. Yes. So so part of the of our observation is that the primacy of the political, even as particularly Mwalimu will go into economic and fiscal issues, the problem is a political one, and part of our problem is that the elaborate accountability structure that we built up over the years has been eroded and disabled by the political elite. Parliament shirks its representation, oversight, and budget-making responsibilities. We've all become familiar with the pictures of the president presenting a budget, and the finance minister going to parliament with his briefcase, but that is a hangover from the past system. The new constitution gives parliament extremely broad powers in terms of budget making and oversight, and it is not exercising them. It has sold its power to the political elite, to the executive, and is not representing the rights of Kenyans. The constitutional accountability architecture is under siege or has failed. We have seen courageous public officials such as the Auditor General and the Controller of Budget who've made valiant efforts to expose the level of mismanagement and misappropriation of resources. But they're under attack, and the usual means is by reducing the budgets available to them. We know the judiciary is also under attack. Their budgets are also reduced. But also, specious charges being raised against the Auditor General, for example. The Kenya National Commission for Human Rights would have a responsibility to monitor whether the government is progressively achieving the Article 43 rights of Kenyans, but enabling legislation has been is basically stuck in Parliament. The Article 43 rights of Kenyans are, of course, socio-economic rights, which are supposed to be progressively implemented by the government. And as we'll see, we've got reducing investment in the development side of our budget, which means that Kenyans are going without the services to which the Constitution has given them a right. So, given the primacy of the political economy of Kenya and the corruption which is endemic in our system and has indeed flourished over the years, it's naive to assume that law and policy cannot be subverted. For example, the IMF approved public-private partnership policy has resulted in the fiascos which we all know. We all know about the Adani scandal, the Bomas of Kenya, etc. So privatization of public assets is generally a process which is captured and corrupt. It's a well-studied phenomenon. Long ago, when Safaricom was being privatized, AfriCOG did a report on it called Deliberate Loopholes. So generally shrouded in opacity, and the people who profit from privatization are not the public who, generally not the public who invested in building up the entities which are being privatized. We talked about jobless growth. Kenya's youthquake, the Gen Z uprising, which is repeated across Africa in various forms. We have statistical growth, and then there's Kenyans' lived experience. So 1 million people leave school each year, but only about 80,000 formal sector jobs are created. Those between the ages of 15 to 34, there are 6 million who are not in education, employment, or training. And this is obviously a time bomb for the future. And the government likes to use the performance of the informal sector to sort of gussy up its economic performance, but the informal sector has been treated more as a public order problem than a sector which actually employs most Kenyans and creates most new jobs. Of course, we can talk about the quality of those jobs, etc. But the fact that youth who are either in the informal sector or who are self-employed, doing the best they can to survive, one of the triggers of their anger were the sort of taxes which were being imposed on the activities they were engaged in. Other observations which we made, and which we'll hear more about, that basically the figures on which planning are based are quite questionable. Revenues are consistently overprojected by this government, and they continue to fall below target. And the false planning the false assumptions on which planning is based are evident when Treasury admits, as it did just a day or so ago, that its 4 new, what you call fiscal instruments, I think it's a fancy name for taxes, are not raising the revenue accepted. Now, about 40 days towards the end of the financial year, the government is expected to table a supplementary budget, number 3 of 2024. So that's the 3rd supplementary budget in this financial year, which is obviously an indication of gross mismanagement and gross misprojection of figures. We also have the problem of runaway pending bills. The figure we've quoted is 706 billion. That came from the Auditor General. There are other figures, but that also indicates the extent of the problem, that government is fudging the figures one way or the other, depending on who those figures are being presented to. But the runaway pending bills are obviously an indication of gross mismanagement and lack of planning. And there are questions on the verification. The government published a strategy paper on the verification of pending bills, but there are questions about the transparency and fairness of that process. A verification committee set up by the government only qualified about 250 billion of those bills. That means that government effectively defaulted on its debt to the suppliers and the private sector. Of course, questions are in order. Procurement in Kenya is endemically corrupt, so some of those bills are definitely questionable, but the process of verification is open to question. We think that it should include other stakeholders, because we can't have the government being the referee and the player. So obviously that has a crippling effect on the private sector. The phenomenon of budgeted corruption we have spoken about. The prior Auditor General spoke about budgeted corruption, which is to say that figures, that resources are budgeted, are inserted into the budget, which are meant to be diverted, which are meant to be misappropriated. So that's an intensification of the usual process of corruption, where you'd wait for implementation in order to take a percentage of that. So if you want to understand more about that, we have a report called Highway Robbery, written by none other than the President's chief economic advisor in the days when he was still a colleague in civil society, but a very interesting report which looks at the financing of infrastructure sector and comes to the conclusion that there is grounds for saying that there is a phenomenon in Kenya called budgeted corruption. Other observations, we asked, what has the government done to deal with the crisis? Is it also prepared to bear the pain? But what we see, the pain that it's being inflicted on Kenyans, what we're seeing is a bloated government. The president has doubled the number of his advisors, which is basically, in principle, he's doubling the size of cabinet. He's already got a cabinet, then he's hiring advisors in processes which are not transparent and not subject to the control or the monitoring of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission or the Public Services Commission. So what we have here is basically the Constitution allows a cabinet of the president, the deputy president, the attorney general, and 22 cabinet ministers. The president seems to have no faith in the cabinet secretaries that he's appointed, and has doubled the size of cabinet, also as part of bringing more people on board in order to build up, to shore up his political support in preparation for the next elections, which we think are the main factor which will be, which will determine events and actions of the government in the next couple of years. So having gone through sort of an overview of the first part of the paper, I'll hand over to Mwalimu to complete that and then to give us an overview, a preliminary overview of the budget estimates and the finance bill. Thank you very much.
Good morning, friends. So I'd like to complete the presentation of the report and its essential elements. As Gladwell said, it is a fairly long document and not amenable to summary in PowerPoint form. But we just wanted to highlight a few things in terms of its actual content. I believe that the document is already here, so it should be distributed to you fairly shortly. So I'll take over at the point where Gladwell was talking about corruption and corruption drivers. So, for example, we'll note that in our current budget, there is probably a very good example of what you'd call budgeted corruption. Corruption not in the sense of pocketing money, but in giving a particular businessman an advantage. And that is something called the importation levy, which seeks to reduce taxation on exported or imported cement, iron or steel by 12.5%. Remember, this is a government that's always saying that it's looking for revenue. So here you're seeing them giving up 12.5% on a tax. But clearly, there's enough anecdotal evidence to show that this is designed to benefit one particular business magnate who is a supporter of the president financially. So those are the kind of things that are going on. The drivers of corruption is an unaccountable executive and a weak parliament that will approve such an obvious gift, as it were. And it's not the first time. I think actually this particular businessman has benefited from amendments to the finance bill in 2023, 2024, and now 2025. So this is actually an embedded sort of arrangement, almost akin, somebody said, to the Guptas in South Africa. Now, we have in the report referenced, excuse me, KTN and your mics are going to fall. Yeah. So let's see how to share the space. So, no, it can't cover my papers. The Auditor General completed a study a couple of years ago on commercial loans that have been taken by the Kenya government over the years, and concluded that in a significant number of cases rather, let me just read it out properly. The Auditor General pointed out the following issues that impair the legality of certain sovereign commercial debt. In 26 loans, the Attorney General's legal opinion had not been sought. In 39 commercial loans, the proceeds were not used for development expenditure. Syndicated loans and sovereign bonds amounting to 1 trillion did not even have a schedule of expenditure. In other words, the money had come into the treasury, but there was no record of how it had gone out. And that was in 13 sovereign bonds and syndicated loans. And then there were loans which had no drawdown information. The discrepancies in the loan balances indicating a lack of rigor in reconciliation. Now, there is no evidence that these practices have stopped, is the first point that I would like to make in terms of a corruption driver. The second issue is domestic debt. Domestic debt, as we have been told by Diana and Gladwell, is now approaching 80% of the size of the deficit. And last year we know that private sector credit contracted even as government borrowing grew. So this kind of statistic is a bit alarming. Now, even though the Central Bank of Kenya has cut rates, lending rates to the private sector, the general public, still remain high. But the question we need to ask is who benefits from this domestic debt? Certainly the government of Kenya will benefit in that it is able to finance its recurrent expenditure, but not much development expenditure. Secondly, you need to ask who invests in domestic debt. And if we are going to have a shift to 78% of the split, then what we need to know is who are the owners of the financial institutions, the banks, etc. And in our report, we actually quote a leading Kenyan economist who is now a very senior government official. Actually, he's the chairman of the Kenya Revenue Authority today. And he basically talks about an area that is not studied, which is the ownership and the beneficial ownership, actually, of commercial banks, which have massive portfolios of domestic debt. And he was able to say when he wrote this report for the NDI 2 years ago, that a deeper analysis of the composition of the ownership of the main vehicles of investments, commercial banks, pension funds, private capital, and high net worth individuals, presents an unnerving picture of inherent power relations. Potentially, it presents the existence of a revolving door between these powerful investment entities and the national treasury in a way that seems to influence the policy prescriptions and the regime that guides debt contraction at domestic level. Now, if you've been a Kenyan and lived as long as I have, you will notice that former permanent secretaries or former ministers of finance are owners of banks. Former presidents or their families are owners of banks. Current presidents are now owners of banks. And so what we're talking about is a form of, it's unusual. If we were truly democratic and accountable, we would have a separation between the elected elite or the appointed bureaucracy and the ownership of the economy. But in Kenya, starting from the 1960s and 1970s, when we had a policy purportedly of Africanization, but what really was sharing the cake amongst a few families, we've had a revolving door between the management of the economy and the players in the economy itself. So we say that we need to start working harder to ensure that beneficial ownership registers are open to the public, because at present, the public portal for the beneficial ownership register is not free access. It's not free to access. For each search, you have to pay 600 shillings. So no meaningful research public, because at present, for each search, you have to pay 600 shillings. So no meaningful research can why the ownership of companies should be producing companies who are being asked, whose ownership was being queried in Parliament. So he said, well, for their privacy, I cannot reveal who are these people who have these contracts, even though the allegation was that they were not supplying any power. So the other issue is that clearly this administration, and many would not have expected any different, suffers from serious serious corruption. You don't have to take our word. We just use the testimony of two ex-insiders and at the highest level. So that's we've reviewed, I suppose, the allegations made by the former Deputy President and the former Attorney General. We note also that today, Salim, we're being critical of the IMF, but we are also critical of other creditors. So, for example, China has decided to refinance 16 roads it had already financed. Now, these roads had been fully financed by the China Development Bank and China Exim, Somehow, Kenya managed to draw down all the money and not complete the projects. So at the last FOCAC, they approved, that's the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. China decided to lend us another almost 300 million dollars? Yeah, $300 million for 16 roads that we had half completed. You can see these if you drive down Mombasa Road, past the JKIA. As you enter Ukambani, all the flyovers are incomplete and are actually being vandalized by people who are harvesting sand from the sandbanks that they're built on. So there's a problem of the moral hazard. You keep lending this drunkard who keeps coming back to you money, and he's not taking any of that money home to feed his children. So it's a moral hazard issue. Then finally, there is a significant issue that we need to call Parliament out on. On several occasions, we've seen attempts by MPs to enact laws that would seek to reverse anti-corruption legislation or to defang it to a certain extent. So I have in mind two instances in which a former MP, now a minister, had attempted to remove the prohibition. You see, once you're convicted of a corruption offense, then you're meant to be barred from office for at least 10 years, was the law. And he was seeking to lift that ban. He's been rewarded, of course, by being made the minister in charge of the entire public service of Kenya. The other thing we noted was an attempt to say that good faith corruption if you were involved in bid rigging in public procurement. So these are the kind of things that are happening in our parliament, partly because of the of the parliament by in our current situation, the pact between Raila Odinga and President Ruto. And prior to that, for the last 10 years, 10 years plus after the new constitution, our parliaments have been getting significantly weaker, more and more likely to do exactly what the executive wants. So if we just go to the next slide, please. We'll then now try to examine some of the implications of that scenario on our budgeting and our finances. So the first thing to note is that even though there are quite significant hikes being proposed for spending in the presidency, and particularly for expenditures which are non-essential, you will find that the government has published a budget that seeks to reduce basic education by 12.7 billion shillings, seeks to cut 4 billion shillings from irrigation, seeks to cut 7 billion shillings from crop development, seeks to reduce the national social safety net by 2 billion, and seeks to take 3.2 billion shillings away from the Children's Services Department. I can't understand any of these provisions. If you add all of that up, that's 12 and 4, 16, 23, 28 billion shillings. At the same time, they're increasing the defense budget by 20 billion shillings. 20? In fact, 29.1. So who is the priority in this country? This is better? Is this better? Is this Vision 2030? Is this the MTEF? Where did these crazy provisions come from? Why is the government abandoning, which is a point we're making, well laid out plans and policies which had been discussed? There's only one conclusion. It's that it's abandoning these policies because it is now more interested in its political survival than in economic management for this medium term, which is the next year or two. Maybe next slide, please. As we get into the public participation phase on the elements in the budget, one of the things that we are being invited to go and discuss is expenditure plans of the different MDAs. But none of us are actually being invited to go and discuss the revenue estimates. Yeah? We're not being asked to go and sit with KRA and go through how much did you make on income tax in each region, how much did you make on VAT, how much are you making on corporate income tax, how many waivers have you been giving to this and that sector. They want you to keep talking about expenditure. But you know, the expenditure, to my mind, maybe this isn't the view, I have not actually discussed this view with Diana or Gladwell, but to my mind, what we are being invited to do when they call us for public participation without being shown where the money is coming from, which is what is our contribution, is to approve a blank check. Yeah? And they've done this successfully since Kibaki left office. Kibaki, at least, used to publish estimates of revenue on the same day that he published the estimates of expenditure. The Jubilee government didn't do that. They started creating summaries where they start telling you, we're going to have something called a budget policy statement, and I'm going to read to you all these figures. But they're always headline figures. It's not like the breakdown of income taxes is, or where is this being collected? Where are appropriations of aid, in aid, being collected within the government? So this is the key insight I think I wanted to try and impart, I hope successfully, and you forgive me if it's probably better written down than verbalized. The second issue is one which we must credit the Okoa Uchumi Coalition and Dr. Rugo, particularly for hammering this point, and Alexander Rithi at TISA, that there's another phenomenon called the floating GDP. Don't know what size it is. You know, it changes depending on what you're trying to calculate. So it's used as a denominator to reduce the impression that you're overly indebted on some occasions. And then it's used to inflate the size of your economy to impress new creditors. So we have a figure that is floating between, Diane, I think it's about 14 to 19 trillion. How on earth? How? That's not a budget. If you can't fix your GDP, then what are we doing? What are we doing? And next is this issue of tax waivers. It's called tax expenditure. I've never understood why. But tax waivers, which is the use of discretion, or is it discrimination by the Ministry of the Cabinet Secretary and the Treasury, to waive taxes for some players. Last year, tax expenditure, we are told, was about 600 billion. You know, that's more than the transfers to the counties. That's too much discretion to be left. So the point is that there is tax available for collection which is being foregone. At the same time, you have a situation as in June last year where multiple new taxes were being imposed, which would not have even collected that 600 billion. So, next slide, please. We're concerned about the fiscal deficit, especially in light of a recent unusual Treasury circular. Immediately the budget estimates were published and tabled in Parliament. A couple of days later, actually a week later, the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury issues a circular in which he says to all his state departments and all the state corporations, I need you to rewrite the budget. So the question is, what are you asking Parliament to approve? You've already tabled a document there. The constitutional arrangement is that you put in a document, you don't alter it, it is debated by the National Assembly, and then it is approved or disapproved line by line. What the Treasury circular seeks to do is to tell people to change the budget without tabling new estimates. There's quite a concern, because even though he's proposing to reduce expenditure by 100 billion, the point is that either Parliament will approve the extra 100 billion, because that's the only document they have, and then he will have leeway to reallocate, or in extremis, it could be even done in reverse. He could issue a Treasury circular to increase the budget. If you're going to violate the law one way, there's no reason to doubt that it could be done the other. So the point is, what Diana was calling fiscal constitutionalism is something that should be taken a bit more seriously, particularly by our creditors. Because if you don't, then you could end up in a situation where it is possible to prove that a budget that is not approved cannot be the basis for loans. That's how you end up in odium, as it were. I think the next point about domestic borrowing, I think, has already been addressed. But the real point is that financial institutions in Kenya are making a massive profit on lending to the Kenya government. In fact, they would prefer to lend to the Kenyan government than to the people. Their ownership is not democratic. I'm not saying that we should socialize finance, but the point is that we don't want a situation where we're transferring tax money into profits, and yet that tax money, the original loan actually is from the public's deposits. So the public deposits money in a bank, the bank lends it to the government, then taxpayers pay a profit to the bank that has merely lent your deposits, hasn't lent you any money, and keeps you at your zero balances. We say that we noted that development budgets are shrinking. As we complete the document, we'll be able to actually do some very good tabular form presentations of where development budgets are falling. We had embarked on a similar exercise earlier for counties, and that also will be feeding into this diagnostic. But in conclusion, we would just say at this preliminary point, to our mind, the proposals contained in the budget and the finance bill show no commitment by the government to respond to the issues raised by Kenya's economic and debt crisis. If anything, Kenya's leaders display an arrogant and short-sighted clinging to the privileges and trappings of power. And this is in the face of the increased austerity imposed on taxpayers and the most vulnerable in society and intensified intergenerational injustice. By planning on perpetually increasing Kenya's unsustainable debt burden to fund their consumption, this government has shown its commitment to stealing the future of Kenya's youth. The motto, "No new taxes," is exposed as an empty public relations gambit, and once again, the government of Kenya is failing to read the writing on the wall. We would urge, Salim, if you would convey to your colleagues on the board of directors that they could take time to try and use this report in its own exercise in generating its own diagnostic. We're encouraging an exercise of self-reflection to acknowledge that Government of Kenya policies, IMF policies, and indeed, perhaps, until June 25 last year, the docility of a large mass of the Kenyan population brought us to this point where we have a promising developing economy being looted by a predatory government, sinking its citizens in unpayable debt. We would argue that this latest budget shows an emboldened and continued economic mismanagement. Proof in point, we now have a main opposition party supplying ministers to this government and adopting without any shame the same policies. Now, I wish the CS were here. He's actually a great friend of ours and has always been. But he's in a bind, I think. And so we say to him that it's a wire rope you're walking on, and it could end in the highest cost imaginable if you ignore the people-centered growth demands and an end to endemic corruption. Asante sana. I think I'll just invite Glado back for a wind-up.
We also have QR codes for you to be able to access the website. I think I'd rather hand over to Cyprian to continue.
So one of the tasks that I have before we open up for the Q and A, because after that we will be going to hear from our friends and colleagues. I am trying to look for how to describe Salim, whether he's friends or colleagues or partners or associates. But I think partner is suitable, isn't it? Because we are in this together. Is to really give you a very brief summary of what we have been saying since Diana came forward to give us the opening remarks. I have called it the conflict of interest problem. Mwalimu and Gladwell, please hear me, because this conflict of interest problem makes governance in this country impossible. Because if, as Diana and Mwalimu and Gladwell are telling us, you elect me to make policies that benefit me and my friends only, then why do I have to give you policies that will create jobs, policies that will create accountability, policies that will create sustainability? So you elect me, I am a member of parliament, I am in the executive, we ensure that the budget is expanded every year, the budget deficit goes up, and once the budget deficit goes up, we have to borrow more, and we want to borrow domestically so that we can be able to lend to government, which we are serving in. And then we will earn all those interest rates from bonds and bills, and our banks are also the lenders domestically. So we are actually in government to ensure that we make policies that ensure that we are benefiting and increasing our wealth and therefore our power every year. So what are elections for? Elections are for removing this set of criminals and then bringing in this set of criminals, because they are also going to ensure that the system works that way. Borrow more money domestically, so therefore earn from government paper, and our banks are also going to lend, and we don't have to lend money to anybody else. And that is why there is this jobless growth annually, which is the figures they read to us. So we have a very fundamental problem here. And I hope that, you know, we can start to, in this meeting, and I hope that Mwalimu didn't hear the recommendations very sharply, because we must do something. This opportunity of the governance diagnostic has to give us an opportunity to really rattle the system. Do we need a law which says that you cannot offer yourself for elections in Africa and in Kenya in particular if you own banks, you own all these things that are lending money to government? Otherwise, how are we going to lower interest rates? Interest rates are 3% in China, it's 4% out there in the US and in Europe. I mean, and we are doing at 17, it goes to 22%. That's why we can't do business here. What do? Tax more to consume more. And we are collapsing the economy. We are in a bound. We are actually destroying ourselves. We are destroying ourselves. So this meeting is very strategic, and the report, the analysis that has been given to us really has rattled me. Not that I don't know these things, but when Gladwell and Mwalimu are the ones who are presenting these things to you, these are very credible, probably the most credible people in our country for the last 20 years or so. So they are calling us to act, to do something, And therefore, Gladwell, when you come back to answer to the Q&A, please tell us sharply what are we going to do now that we have this report in our hands. As Okoa Uchumi, what are we supposed to do? Diana and I, what are we supposed to do with it? What do we do now? Because something has to give, something has to change in this fiscal year. So thank you very much for that. We are going to have a very brief, let me see how we do that, because I'm trying to see where we are in terms of time and what we had promised ourselves. Let us have a few, very few questions, maybe 3 or 4, or comments, so that Gladwell and Mwalimu can dispense with that. Then we'll have Salim from IMF coming forward. And then we will do the launch of the report after that. That's how we want to sequence it, so that the media can also get what they want from the session. So are there any questions or comments based on the report that we have received from Mwalimu and Gladwell? Let me see if we have any questions or comments. There's one of the questioners, number 2. Any other person? Let's start with that and see where we land. There's a mic for you. Please tell us who you are, and then you can be able to pose your question.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning to you.
My name is Larry Naftali from BTG. So I want to ask the IMF this question. What is the criteria they use in government lending? Because I think every year, every president that gets in, they have their way of getting money, either from the IMF or from any institution from any country. Yeah? So we want to know what's the criteria you guys use in lending that money, and in what way do you make sure that the follow-up that you do, that you make sure that the money that you give out is being used wisely and is being used to its full use? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Moshori John from Kiambu County. My question is simple. What are we supposed to do as common mwananchi? Yes, we're in this place as civil society, people who know what to do. But when we get back home, what are we supposed to tell our parents what they need to do to correct this mess that we are in?
As taxpayers, Diana called us taxpayers,
exactly.
And we indeed are.
Yes.
What are we supposed to do? Okay, George Kegoro? Oh, okay. Any other comment? I want to, there's my colleague here. Please, if you can pass the mic to her.
Good morning. My name is Esther Diana from Standard Media Group. I have 2 questions and to the organizer of this report. So my question is, perhaps what is your take on the 4.2 trillion budget that has been proposed? Is it within Kenya's revenue creation muscle, given the background of the previous financial years and revenue shortfalls? And another thing, you started by raising a pertinent question on what is the government doing to come to grips with the actual state of the Kenya's economy? So from where you sit, do you perhaps think that the Kenya's government, the revenue strategy, is it out of touch with reality of Kenya's economic situation?
Thank you very much. George, please, we can pass the mic here. And then I will invite Gladwell or Mwalimu to respond to those.
Thank you very much. It's a very, very good report. I was just going to say, and you said it, I'm just going to say it for emphasis, that what is happening with pending bills already constitutes a default on the part of Kenya. But because of the power asymmetry between the government on the one hand and the fact of the creditors being dispersed, because if you have a 1 million shilling pending bill with a ministry, you don't know the next person who is making a claim, and so on and so forth. So the fact that the creditors in pending bills are not organized as a movement is a key reason why that question doesn't have a greater level of policy priority. So thinking through this is to say that going forward, effort should be put in place in organizing people who have, who find themselves unorganized because they don't know one another. They just have a figure of now approaching a trillion, sorry. But we don't know who are the constituent individuals. They don't necessarily know one another. They are not necessarily organized to speak in one voice and to make a collective demand that what is owed to them must be paid, or what they have been made to face is inexcusable and unacceptable. That way, and only that way, I think, would that question have the level of priority that it has long deserved but lacked.
Thank you very much. Gladwell, Mwalimu, would you... thank you very much, George, for that. If we can have Gladwell or Mwalimu or both of you responding to those interventions in whichever format. Thank you. And Selim will obviously, when he will be coming to speak, we'll definitely be beginning with what my colleague here posed in terms of what are we looking at when we are lending money to governments. Thank you very much. Gladwell, please.
Thank you very much for the questions. I should say this report is, we're aiming at a moving target. So events are developing every day. So we do our best to be accurate in what we're crept in. But in terms of the conflict of interest, it's imminent, it's endemic in government, and it traces its roots back to policy decisions which were made by government soon after independence, where public servants were allowed to conduct private business and even to conduct business with government. And when one looks at the draft conflict of interest bill, which is still in Parliament, one notices that the conflict of interest bill does not ban government employees from working with, from doing business with government. They do try to impose some constraints in terms of public servants doing direct business with the departments, ministries that they work with. So a conflict of interest is simply endemic in our system, and the consciousness of what constitutes a conflict of interest is extremely blunted. I think you can think of examples yourself, but that's generally just, I mean, Mwalimu talked about the banks, ownership of the banks. We know public servants and prominent officials own banks, they own businesses, they do business with government, and because of the opacity surrounding beneficial ownership, etc., it's very difficult for us to actually trace these conflicts of interest. But of course, in Kenya or in Africa, it's very difficult to keep secrets, so most people know anecdotally, you know, who is involved in what kind of business. We were asked about recommendations. This is an interim report. We're still researching. We're still canvassing opinions with the coalition membership. But I would like to say, if you look at the history of Kenya, and if you look, for example, at our website, Kenya's government shelves are full of policy recommendations. The problem is not the recommendations. The problem is the implementation. The problem is the enforcement. So I would say that really the issue is the government serious about implementing all the recommendations that have been made to it? And obviously, at the end of this exercise, we hope to come out with recommendations. But I think the problem really is enforcement. So I think, what are we supposed to do? I think Gen Z showed the way in terms of its organizational power and standing up to let the government know that it was not in agreement with the proposals of government in the finance bill last year. And you saw the way that the government was shaken by the uprising. So Kenyans have the power in their hand. Mwalimu said that the docility of Kenyans has also contributed to the problems that we're experiencing. And Gen Z certainly showed the way in terms of how people can take back the power which they donated to government, which is not acting in their interests. So I think we're not helpless. We really just don't realize our own strength. And as George was pointing out when talking about the constituency of people who are owed money by government, and government has simply unilaterally said, we're not going to pay you. And as I said, we cannot say for sure that all those claims are legitimate, but the problem is those people are atomized. They're not organized, and everyone is trying to find a private solution for a public problem. So organization and unity is obviously one of the answers that I can give you. We talked, I think we made it very clear that, and particularly Mwalimu made it clear that the government simply overprojects revenue consistently. I mean, it's a structural issue. And as Mwalimu pointed out, the government does not inform us in a timely manner of where the money it intends to spend is coming from. So I think there are people in the room who can describe to you what looks to the outside observer like a scam. You claim that you've got money that you don't have, and then you get it approved, and then you go out and borrow to make the difference. I think Mwalimu and others in the room can explain it a lot more effectively than I can, but it certainly is eyebrow-raising that the government of Kenya is so incapable of giving a realistic assessments of how much money it can take in. We're not asking for perfection. I don't think there's any country in the world which has complete knowledge of all the the information available or the information necessary to produce a budget. But as Mwalimu also pointed out, if you have to have 3 supplementary budgets within the space of a year, and if when you've tabled a budget and then before Parliament is even discussing it, you're already amending it, can we really talk about a budget? I think, you know, those of you in the room who are economists can tell us what a budget must look like, what an effective and credible budget must look like, what information it must contain. So the fact that you know, we are plagued by this pending bills problem, the fact that we're continually revising our budget estimates means that we're really not serious about planning. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Mwalimu to...
The second part of it. Mwalimu? Thank you, Dad.
Yeah.
Nothing to add. Was there something I missed, Cyprian? I can't remember. Well, I think... we are really... yeah, because of time, I don't think I should.
But also very, very particular in terms of recommendations. Yes. The spirit of the room is that we need to say these are the radical things that Okoa Uchumi is pushing to be done to rescue our country. You don't have to do that right now, but I think the room is asking for that kind of sharpness for this conference.
I think, Cyprian, all I would say is this. There was a time when the issue was debatable, or it was esoteric or arcane. It was for the economists. Remember these discussions that were restricted to the Institute of Economic Affairs and that part of civil society. What Okoa Uchumi is doing, which I think it must continue to do, is to organize constituencies around money, public finance. You've done it, you've done very well in even getting us to the point where we have agreed that it's actually a national issue, and it also found its way to the street, which is where it counts. It's the people who needed to feel that taxation is an issue. Boston, 1776 and all that. It's obvious. But Gladwell is saying unity and organization, and George is saying tactics. What are the entry points? And he's saying there are constituencies. For example, there are some people today who were informed yesterday or day before that their hopes of ever getting money from counties or government have vanished, and they are holding paper worth maybe about 300 billion shillings. These are angry people who could be organized to do class action suits. Maybe overturn the Government Proceedings Act exemption against attaching government property, things like that. But so it's a combination of, you know, you've got your issue. Tactics now are needed to keep the ball rolling. And ultimately, you know, must commend Okoa Uchumi. They've managed to get an engagement with the Bretton Woods institutions. That's something which is a milestone. Also, I would say, it's also great to see that there's been a reciprocity in that you're even attending events in Kenya. I remember our previous IMF country directors were very remote. They were very, very remote. Not that they were enemies, but they did feel that it was not their business to engage with civil society. So this is something that there's some opportunity for some leverage, is all I would say.
Thank you very much. We appreciate both Gladwell and Mwalimu. You can see that you've actually forced us to really think because you're giving us very heavy stuff. But Diana, why don't you make a comment, or Alex, and then we move over to our partners. Alex.
Okay, thank you, Cyprian. let me just make one comment, and then Diana will come and get us going. I wanted to respond to the question from our colleague from Standard. What is our view on the current 4.2 trillion budget? I just want to bring to your attention that the numbers you've seen here, the 876 billion deficit is quite worrying, and 591 billion of that deficit summit, and we were informed by the Treasury that in supplementary 2, they reduced the revenue projection to 2.58 trillion, and now there is a supplementary 3 that is likely to reduce the ordinary revenues further down. So if by the close of the financial year, which is happening in the next 1 month, we are likely to achieve less than 2.5 trillion, it could be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.3 or 2.4 trillion, then how do we again expect that the ordinary revenue will go to 2.75 that is in the fiscal framework? So in our view, that is still over-projected, and we are likely to end up at around 2.5 trillion by the end of the next financial year if we are doing very well. So it automatically means that the budget as submitted in the National Assembly already has an over-expenditure of a number above 200 billion. So that number will be plugged in either through additional borrowing externally and domestically, or we will end up having several supplementary budgets to try and feed into that. So in our view, that budget is still not balanced, and therefore it will bring in some challenges. Let me hand over to Diana to make a few comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Mwalimu and Gladwell. These are the vanguards of driving accountability. If there was Okoa Uchumi in 2000 when I was in high school, these are the leaders of that Okoa Uchumi. They may not be speaking radically right now, but they are radicals. They truly are radicals, and when you read the report, you will see that, and they've mentored some of us to where we are. What must we do, Kenyans? We must move from just protesting to occupying power. We must get ready to occupy power, because the people in power are responsible for the mess that we are in. We must reject budgets that, no, nowadays this is my new style. I no longer frown. Because if you frown too much, you age faster. And I am here to ensure that the reclaiming of this nation happens. We must reject budgets like the ones that have been projected here, where we are slashing budgets for education, social protection, children's services. Who takes away anything from children? Even when there is no food, we feed children first, not the army. Okay? So please note, we must get ready to dismantle the people who have captured the Kenyan state. They occupy economic power even more than they occupy political power. Because they do not have enough banks, they have lifted the moratorium for registering commercial banks, so that more of their descendants and their friends, people here don't have friends who can own banks, at least me I have, are going to take over spaces so that they make capital. Sydian Bank. If I am hired there, by next year, I won't be operating here. I will be calling meetings on an island. Because it's now matching the profits that KCB and CBA have had over the years. Is it that they have a very good business strategy or just a political strategy? If it's a business strategy, then that business strategy needs to, we must demand that it be brought to the Kenyan people. But if it's a political strategy, we must take over and create a political strategy that gets us out of this particular mess. Linked to everything that we have said here and something that is not coming out, the president launched Mukuru. Yes, Zaina and I have a lot of trauma around Mukuru because the demolitions that happened there on some Christmas period, we were right there with the Mukuru people, and they were supposed to get better housing that is for them. Housing that at that particular point was coming from taxes. We are now paying housing levy, and their houses, the land in Mukuru, the ownership is not clear. Right? This week, I have focused on asking Kenyans, taxpayers, in your constituency, is all your public land secure? Or has it been grabbed, leased, without your authority? We must do audits of our public land. Ultimately, I am hoping by the time we are done with the governance diagnostic, or even today, okay? Gen Zs, can we start a petition, stop stealing the future? Yeah? We start the petition of stop stealing our future. And the same demands that were there in 2024 are true for today. Do not elect anyone who has any allegation of corruption, because it's about ethical leadership. The things that we are proposing here around the size of government, what are the government priorities? We put it out there and we start organizing for that come 2027. We will not want to state the actions. You will see some of them. For us, we have occupied the spaces we could. Parliament, IMF, even as you see Selim here, very courageous, and I want to commend him. The same way Mwalimu Mati has said, the IMF has always shunned and shied away from civil society, and even at the top of IMF, we have tried to engage, and sometimes they come back and they are like, no, we deal with government. Then because we have said it softly, we yell. But we are government. How are you government? Because ultimately, all those things you're proposing, nowadays I have a new statement. Governments will change. But the people, the citizens of governments will never change. That is the reason why they must engage with the people. And Selim has decided to be engaging the people. He shows up in all our Okoa meetings as the first one, as the very first person. And I'm hoping that coming here gives you the needed context and understanding, and we are optimistic that the IMF will write for the Kenyan people a people's report, even as we compete with the people's diagnostic. Asante sana to everybody. I hope I have given the action. Back Please. To you, Cyprian.
Can I request, now that you are there, to kindly welcome Salim to come and make his remarks at this stage, please.
And having said that, one of the people you would call duty bearers, I'm told the senators are not able to join us because Baba has gone to the Senate. Friends of Baba, can you tell Baba that he's part of this problem? Friends of Baba, please tell Baba he is part of this problem. Some of us will make sure he gets the report. But as we audit the contracts that politicians hold, we will also audit the contracts that Baba and his family hold. Because all these handshakes, broad-based and so on, they take away from the power of the people, but we will work towards that. So allow me to invite Selim Kakir. Selim has been a very diligent civil servant, and in his earlier days, he steered Turkey out of a debt crisis as a good technocrat in treasury and worked closely with civil society. He's been with the IMF in different spaces, came to Kenya and found a time when the Okoa Uchumi had placed a wreath outside the IMF offices like, Kwaherini, go away, we have buried you. But he had the courage to engage with us, and we've walked a journey, and now he shares and even gives us insight. Karibu sana. Welcome, welcome, Salim.
Thank you very much. Diana, do you hear me? Hello? Yeah?
Yes, that's very good.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana, Cyprian, Alex, Angela, Gladwell, yeah, Malibu and other colleagues. Let me start by saying that as I age, I noticed that, you know, very few people kind of take the blame, right? Or respond positively to criticism. And when they do, they don't mean it most of the time. So I have a bit the same reactions, right? Some of it. But I think what Diana said is that we weren't good listeners, right, of the civil society. And that, I think, is a correct assessment. So we try to be better listeners. And me attending to those events is part of that. Me coming first is mostly my office team putting the wrong time on the agenda, so I arrive a bit early. But no, thank you. This is well received. You know, when it comes to working with civil society, I think this governance and corruption diagnostics that we will be holding provides a very good opportunity. We have been engaging with you, and I welcome this report. I didn't get a chance to read it because I think you have just shared it, but we will read it very carefully. And it comes very timely because this is the time we are starting the process, and this will be a very valuable input, and we will incorporate when we thought it corresponds with the issues that we deem important. Let me talk to you about these diagnostics that we will be holding to give you a framework, and I'll talk about the role of the IMF and the program at the end. Now, this recognizing the evidence of the negative association between weak governance and corruption on the one hand, and inclusive growth and fiscal performance on the other hand, the International Monetary Fund offers to any of its member countries the delivery of technical assistance in the form of governance and corruption diagnostic. This is mostly a capacity development activity to help assess the severity and nature of corruption holistically, identify governance weaknesses associated with vulnerabilities across core state functions most relevant to economic activity. And these reports map out a sequenced, prioritized, and a time-bound set of recommendations for strengthening governance, anti-corruption, and the rule of law. Those areas are basically fiscal governance. We look at the revenue administration, public financial management, fiscal transparency. On the financial sector oversight, we look at the governance of the supervisory authority, Central Bank of Kenya. And again, we also look at the central bank governance, operational safeguards, accountability and transparency mechanisms. We'll look at the market regulations, market reform, trade facilitation, investment climate. Rule of law is another area, with judicial integrity, protection of property rights, contract enforcement, and also money laundering and terrorism financing issues. Now, these diagnostics are forward-looking exercises carried out in close collaboration with government authorities and drove information from different sources, including civil society organizations. Now, I think very good points were made. One is, it is truly the Kenyans that know Kenya's problems better. It's very difficult for us to come from outside, look at what is happening in the country and come up with good recommendations. So we rely on the people knowing the country more. We rely on other development partners and their work. But the success of any IMF program or the success on implementing the results of this diagnostic depends on the ownership. And I think the civil society has a role to play. Even after writing this report, when we publish our report, I understand that Diana and colleagues are thinking of some framework on to follow up on the recommendations. And I think there'll be a very crucial